All right, welcome back to Ducks and Pucks. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co host, Eddy Jones. We have a special edition for you this week. We're going to do our season predictions as far as the East and Western Conference and how the teams are going to pan out. We're going to go through the Eastern Conference first, talk about each team, what they've done in the offseason and where they may end up, and then we'll switch and we'll go to the Western Conference. So we'll start off with the Eastern Conference, and we've got ranked 16th as the Buffalo Sabres. They were 16th last year in the Eastern Conference, Eddie. And what are the problems that Buffalo has staying at the bottom of the league?
It's probably more than anybody else. They're a team that's in a full rebuild and just starting a rebuild after moving, in the last few years, moving out Thomas Vanek, Jason Palmerville, and now Ryan Miller. They've added a few pieces. They added Sam Reinhart, Sam Reinhart in the draft. Mikhail Grigorenko's ready to come up. They have a couple defensemen in Zadorov and Ristolainen who are looking for more minutes, but I don't see Buffalo doing as bad as it did last year. That's just 52 points is way worse than anybody else. But with no Miller back there, you've got Enroth and Neuwirth as your starting goalies, and not really. They've added some veterans, which is just to help mentor some of the young guys coming in that I mentioned. Matt Molson's back, Brian Gionta from Montreal, and Andre Mazzaros, Josh Georges. They're all good additions. It'll make the team better, but I don't see them passing and getting out of that bottom basement in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem, like we had mentioned before, is the goalie situation. With Miller gone, I don't see how they're going to be able to win enough games between those two goalies. They're just too inexperienced.
Yeah, both of them have been backups for their whole career. Enroth has shown like both of them have shown bright spots, but they've shown bright spots as backups. They've come in for like a couple games, or through an injury and been able to do well, but they haven't shown that they can start 30 plus games or more and win at least 50% of those. So it'll be another tough season for Buffalo, but they're headed in the right direction as for a rebuild. And oh, I gotta watch this season is their new draftee Sam Reinhart. They picked him up, I believe. I think they drafted him second overall. So he'll add to some good young centers they have there in Cody Hodgson and Tyler Ennis, and they'll give them some depth up the middle, which is how teams are starting to build. That's kind of how you build for success now, is you build up the middle. So we'll have to see how those guys are going to do for them. Cody Hodgson led them in scoring last year, and he's going to have to do the same this year. And Tyler Ennis and Matt Molson are going to have to put up significant points if they hope to move anywhere out of the bottom of the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and speaking of additions, the next team we have ranked is the Florida Panthers, and they added seven new players on there. They had Dave Bolin, Jokinen, Sean Thornton, Derek McKenzie, Willie Mitchell, Al Montoya, Greg Zanin. So they're trying to build too. Last year they finished 15th, and we have them also ranked 15th in the conference. Do you think they're building in the right direction too, or do you think they're just kind of still staying at the bottom?
I think I had Florida at 15th, and it's really like there's a logjam kind of in different areas, and there's a lot of teams fighting for the bottom playoff spot in the East, and then there's a lot of teams down near the bottom that could really move anywhere around. I think Florida's just as good as the Islanders and the Hurricanes and the Senators, but I just have them just because they're so young. And where they finished last year. Luongo's going to help them, but I don't see them moving anywhere higher than 13th. But I've got them at 15th just because they're inexperienced, and Luongo's going to have to be stellar for them. They finally solidified goaltending, which is something they've had problems with for a while. But as we talked about with Buffalo, Florida's a little bit farther along in their rebuild. Getting Aaron Ekblad was a huge step forward for them. They've got added him to a great crop of rookies that they have on forward with Huberdeau and Barkov, Bukestad. They're pretty set down the center now. They're working on some of the defense with Gudbranson and now Aaron Ekblad. So Florida's headed in the right direction, but pushing anywhere higher than 10th, it would be a huge stretch to say for them.
Yeah, I would definitely say, for them, their lineup being a young lineup, we saw them last year too, where they had, some serious ups and downs. They had a couple games they would play really well, and then they would have just a stretch of just terribleness. So I think, consistency is probably one of their biggest issues.
Yeah, and they'll get that from the veterans they brought in. Dave Boland's been around for a while. Sean Thornton's a good pickup for them. Willie Mitchell will help shore up some of their young defensemen there. So yeah, the veterans will help move along the rookies, but they're a couple seasons out from challenging for a playoff spot.
And so, as you mentioned before, too, kind of in that log jam. Next up, we have the Islanders at 14th. Last year, they also finished 14th in the Eastern Conference, and they made some additions too. They had brought in goalie Havlik, um, Johnson, a couple other players as well. Gone. I don't know if they've really added enough though to do too much. I know the Islanders have kind of had some struggles down the road. Plus they lost Thomas Vanek and Matt Molson too.
Yeah, they've lost that guy on the wing with John Tavares, and if they still had one of those guys, I'd probably put them higher. John Tavares was injured for I believe 30 games, 30 or so games last season. So that really hurt their chances. They're not, like I said again, they're not far out from teams like Carolina, like Ottawa, even like Toronto, New Jersey, Washington. They've got a star obviously in John Tavares. But they still have some problems. They picked up Grabowski and Kuhlman, Conacher for some forward depth. Like the Florida Panthers, they actually added a goaltender who lately has struggled, but he's proven at times he can be a number one, and he's better than anything they've had lately. And Chad Johnson is a great backup goalie for them. TJ Brennan had 72 points in 74 games in the AHL last year as a defenseman. So he's a good pickup for them, and he's probably gonna start down there. Some guys are gonna have to have some young guys step up if they want to, at least on defense if they want to go anywhere. Griffin Reinhardt's gonna have to come up and do well. Travis Hamonic is gonna have to lead that line because right now they don't really have any top four leaders on defense, so they're gonna have to have somebody that's gonna lead the way for them, or they're gonna be still around 14th, 13th in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the only way that they can really make a push for the playoffs is if they rely on the two goalies. If they can go back and forth and be a good tandem, then maybe they can carry them, maybe to that eighth spot. But it looks like it's going to be a tough go for them offensively this coming year.
Yeah, and John Tavares is the key to any success with the Islanders, and he's gonna have to stay healthy for at least 70 games if they have any chance at fighting for a playoff spot.
Next up, we have Carolina Hurricanes. We have them at 13th, and like you said, they're kind of mixed in with that group too. They finished also 13th last year. They only made a couple additions: Brad Malone, Jay McClement, or Clement, my bad, and Tim Gleason. So they've only added a couple. Not really too much going on at Carolina. They have a new coach and a new GM, but I don't know. Their defense has been up and down too. I think you're probably pretty right on this prediction. They're probably going to still be towards the bottom and just miss the playoffs too.
Yeah, the main problem last year was Cam Ward's injury. Antoine Khudobin, he did step up and play well for them, but Cam Ward has to be better this year if they have any chance of getting near a playoff spot. I don't see him returning to what he once was. I think his numbers will be better because he had some terrible numbers last year. But Eric Stahl's gonna have to have a better season. His brother's gonna have to have a lot better season than he had. Alexander Semin's gonna have to play well. Your Toulouse is gonna be another guy that's gonna have to contribute to secondary scoring on that team. Uh, you're gonna have to watch for Elias Lindholm to step up. They're gonna need him to play well too. And their main issue right now is on defense. Tim Gleason was brought back, which I don't think was the best acquisition to bring him back. Andres Sequeiros had a great season last year. I think he was upwards of 50 points, so he's gonna have to do that again. I don't know if he can do have the same offensive output that he had, but he's gonna have to have a good season. And yeah, youngster Ryan Murphy and Justin Falk are gonna have to have good seasons too if Carolina wants to fight for a playoff spot. But we have them 13th, and I can't see them moving a lot higher than that. Maybe two, give or take, two spaces ahead or back. But yeah, I don't see Carolina getting much better, and it's really on the Stahl brothers' shoulders and Cam Ward.
Yeah, I think definitely for the offense, they're going to have to try and get some more points because otherwise they're going to be relying, like you said, on trying to have Ward, you know, pitch shutouts or close to shutouts most of the games, and then have the defense also try to step up. And I just think that's just too much to ask, for that team. They've got to try to put some points on the board.
Yeah, they struggled scoring goals last year. I think they were third last in the league, which is close to where they finished. They finished fourth from the bottom, so they're gonna have to score goals, and Eric Stahl's gonna have to be the one who gets it done for them, and Alexander Semin.
Next up on our list here, we have the Ottawa Senators ranked 12th. Obviously the big news was when they lost Jason Spezza, and we know about all the media surrounding that. So that was the huge loss for them. They brought in Chason and Legwand, so those are going to help on the offense. But this is another team, that I mean, they're again not to be a broken record, but they're stuck in that bottom group trying to make their way. Just I think again being inconsistent, and I think losing Spezza at center is really not going to help on the face-off circle, Eddie.
Yeah, and they didn't really add a whole bunch. They got Chase on back in that deal for Spezza, and he'll play. He at best he could probably put up 20 goals for them. Leg one they signed a free agency, which was a good signing. They needed a guy to come in. He's not going to play first line. Most likely Turris is going to move up to that first line, and Zabrinajad and Leg one are going to fight for the second and third line roles. And that's not terrible in center, but Turris is going to have to step up. He's going to have to fulfill the potential he had when he was first drafted by Arizona. So Turris is going to have to take that Spets role, and if there's a chance that he can do that, but he's not going to fill. They've lost a lot of leaders in that room. Chris Phillips is still there, and he's one of the only ones they have left. Alfredson's gone. Spets is now gone. So they're gonna struggle this year, and that's why I have them finishing one lower than they did last year. A lot of pressure is gonna be on Turris' shoulder, like I said. Anderson and Lehner and net are gonna have to play well. Anderson's gonna have to get back to the form that took Ottawa to the playoffs a couple years ago. So I don't see them making a charge this year. They're gonna have to get some output from some guys that have struggled recently, and it's tough to see them making a playoff push.
Yeah, I agree. And the other rumor that was out there was that they may be looking to trade Bobby Ryan too. So if they do that and try to bring in a bunch of youngsters, then they may just be looking at another season of rebuilding, Eddie.
Yeah, and that would be I don't think that's the right path for them. I think they have enough talent where they just have to wait for some guys like Curtis Lazar and Cody Ceci to come to their own. But it looks like Bobby Ryan could go to Philadelphia if anywhere, but it remains to be seen if he actually gets traded or not.
And speaking of Philadelphia, that's who we have listed next. It's finishing 11th in the conference, significantly lower than what they did this past year as they were in the playoffs. They've lost a lot of players and they've added a lot of players. It's going to be interesting to see with the trade of Scott Hartnell to Columbus. So I don't with some of these additions and stuff. I don't really understand what Philly was doing. I don't see a lot of improvements for them going into this next season, Eddie.
Yeah, I think Philadelphia's a good team, and don't get me wrong, it won't surprise me if they make the playoffs. They're one of the teams that when you get around these teams, any of these teams from like 11 up could make the playoffs, and obviously Philadelphia comfortably. Well,
Right.
they made the playoffs. They were 1 point out, but they were in six last year, and Claude Giroux kind of led the way for them. And the main factor though in them actually doing well last year was Steve Mason had a career season after struggling for most of his career. So the only reason I have them down here is I've seen Steve Mason firsthand. I don't see him repeating the same kind of season he had last year. If he does, then they can easily make the playoffs. I just don't see it happening. And Ray Emery is a capable backup, but between those two, they'll both have to be stellar for them to make the playoffs again. And obviously, Claude Giroux, uh, Simmons, Hartnell's gone, so Umberger comes in, Voracek. Those guys are gonna be the guys are gonna have to lead the way for them, and some guys to watch too. Or they brought in Michael Del Zotto for defense, and we'll have to see if he can fulfill the potential that he had when he was with the Rangers. But yeah, they're gonna have to be, everything's gonna have to click for the Flyers to make the playoffs again.
Yeah, I think also another thing that we've kind of seen with some of these teams, and you'll probably agree, is that they're trying to rely too much on like the one or two lines as far as offense goes. You just can't be a solid playoff contending team with just one or two lines that are going to produce offense, Eddie.
Yeah, and the Eastern Conference is a little bit easier. A lot of these teams would not survive in the Western Conference with some of the center depth
Right.
they have. The Flyers have a good team, and then, like I said, it all comes down to I don't trust Steve Mason enough to have the same kind of season he had last year. So I think they're gonna struggle this year if he doesn't do well.
Next up on our list, we have Toronto finishing 10th in the conference, and just they'll be just on that outside too. I know Toronto, you're pretty well versed in Toronto, being close in proximity to them. What do you see? They've picked up a few people. We let go. The Ducks did of Stefan Robidas, so he went over there, and they picked up a couple of centers. They also got Winnick from us too. What do you think as far as Toronto? You think they're just kind of hovering again outside that window of the playoffs?
Yeah, they're another one of these bubble teams. They could have easily bumped a team like Detroit or Philadelphia out of the playoffs if they didn't finish so terribly, didn't finish the season so badly. But they didn't really add. They kind of just replaced the same things they got rid of. Tim Gleason and Carl Gunnison made way for Roman Polak and Stefan Robidas. David Booth came in, Dave Bolin left, Jeremy D'Amigo, Mason Raymond, Kuhlman all left, Fratton, Komarov, Santorelli, Winnick, Petri Kontala came in. So they didn't really add anything that they get like they kind of just swapped like for like. For what they added was basically the same what they what they got rid of. So Toronto's gonna be one of those teams that if they make the playoffs, I'm not gonna be surprised. They're on the bubble. They're gonna have to finish a lot stronger than they did last year. They've got Bernier and Reimer in net, and they're gonna have to play well. Nazem Kadri's gonna have to step up and fill that second line center role, and he's gonna have to work on his faceoffs that he's been pretty bad at since the start of his career. Bozak, Van Riemsdyk, and Kessler are gonna have the same kind of season they did last year, and their defense is gonna have to be a lot better. It's been really disorganized. Dejan Phaneuf hasn't really uh, been the player that he was when he was with Calgary, so their defense is gonna have to be a lot better. And when you see guys like Stefan Robidas and Roman Polak come in, it looks like Brendan Shanahan's trying to bring in the team that he wants, and we'll have to see how they can cope with trying to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I think that they're leaning a little bit too much on the defense too, like some of these other teams. I was surprised, not that they signed Robota, but the 3-year deal. I just thought with his leg issues, last season, that was kind of a surprise to me. I just don't think the defense is going to really come through for them. I mean, that's probably going to be the make it or break it for them, whether or not they're going to be in that seventh or eighth spot or out.
Yeah, they needed to bring in a guy like Stefan Robidas. I agree with you that a 3-year deal is kind of, oh, it's definitely a little bit too long for a guy that has broke his leg twice now. But they've got a lot of young guys in there. Morgan Riley's going to be in there. Gardner, Franzen, Diamphanos the captain. But you need another guy to come in there and kind of marshal the blue line. And Stefan Robidas and Roman Polak have been around the league for a while, so hopefully they'll be able to, or hopefully for Toronto fans, they'll be able to whip the defense into shape. And Toronto might definitely has a shot at making the playoffs. But I have them at 12th, or sorry, at 10th.
10th, right? And then next on the bubble, another team, New Jersey Devils. We've got them at ninth, finishing in the conference. They added Camilleri, Havlat, Clemenson. Didn't really lose too much. I don't, see them doing a whole lot. I mean, I know they still got to figure out what's going on with Brodeur. And they're going probably with Snyder. So I don't think they're too bad in the net, but I think this is another team too that's just they don't have a lot of offense going for them, and I think the defense too, just trying to be consistent on the blue line.
Yeah, New Jersey's one of those teams that they you kind of don't really pay attention to them, and they just missed the playoffs by 5 points last year, but they couldn't score any goals, and that was their problem. And I think their additions in the offseason fixed exactly what they needed. Mike Camilleri is going to be their focal point now, and Martin Havlat is no he's no average Joe either when it comes to scoring goals. So
Right.
he could come in with Mike Camilleri, and they kind of fix their problems there. The only problem I have with New Jersey is how old some of their players are. That Yammer Yager was their leading scorer last year, and he's going to be 43 this year. Mike Camilleri's over 30, Havlat's over 30, Eliash is near the end of his career too. Michael Ryder's still there. Some of the only young guys they have are Adam Henrique is there, Reed Boucher. They've got to these older guys have to produce again if New Jersey wants to make the playoffs, and especially Yammer Yager and Mike Camilleri are going to have to get goals for this team because they only had 197 goals last year, which I believe was third worst in the NHL, but or in the Eastern Conference. But they finished 10th. Corey Schneider is going to prove that he can be a number one goalie with Brodeur gone, and he's going to have to play at least 60 games this season because Scott Clemmensen isn't going to play more than 20. If they want to make the playoffs, Corey Schneider's going to have to carry them there. I think he's capable of doing it. It just the old guys on New Jersey have to score goals, and New Jersey's kind of in a bad predicament here because with all these older guys, they've kind of got a small window with not such a great team. So they've got to make the playoffs this year and try and go for another run like they did when they made the Cup Finals back in 2012.
Yeah, I agree with you. The older players are going to have to step up, and like you said, Snyder's going to have to push for that team and be solid. At least 50, 60 games for sure. Now, going on to the teams that are going to make the playoffs, we have Detroit as eighth, which is where they finished last year. And they didn't really do a whole lot in the off season. I mean, Detroit's one of those teams that, obviously we saw it when they were still in the Western Conference with Zetterberg and Datsuk doing damage. So the thing with Detroit is they come in, and if they make eighth, I mean, you just don't know what they can do. They can still upset some teams. We were victim of it. Obviously we don't have to worry about it now that they're in the East, but they could still come in there and at least win a first round playoff series, even if they were seventh or eighth, Eddie.
Yeah, and Detroit always seems to find a way to make the playoffs. They've got the streak of making the playoffs. I believe it's 24 seasons now where they've made the playoffs. So Detroit, I think they can find a way. Datsuk and Zetterberg were injured for large amounts of the season last year, and as Mike Babcock said, the kids kind of led them to the playoffs. Gustav Nyquist, Thomas Tatar, Riley Shahan, and a couple other guys. Those were the guys who led them to getting that last playoff spot last year. And they're gonna have to step up again, and Zetterberg and Datsuk are gonna be back. Cronwall's still on defense. They've lost David Legwan, but he didn't really do great there. They haven't lost too many guys. They haven't added a whole bunch of guys. I gotta watch too is Anthony Mantha if he actually gets called up to the Red Wings. He's a great prospect for them. So it's gonna come down to how well the kids can do again with Pavel Datsyuk again, Zetterberg in the lineup, and how well Jimmy Howard and Jonas Gustafsson can do as tandem in net.
And then the next team that we have making the playoffs at seventh is the Washington Capitals. The big move that they did was Niskanen for that big contract on defense that they picked up. Also, Orpik, Justin Peters in net, and Connor. So they made some good additions there. I think Niskanen is going to be relied on a lot. He's going to be a player to watch there. Obviously, Ovechkin. Everybody, of course, knows Ovechkin, and I don't see him going down in production at all. He's going to lead that team and put it on his shoulders again. But the only difference between them and Detroit I see is when Washington gets into the playoffs, they just have a difficult time. I don't see them. Maybe they win in the first round, but I don't see them getting farther than the second round, Eddie.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I have Washington in the playoffs this year is because they've got Barry Trotz as a coach. He was with Nashville for a long period of time before he got fired. So I think he can whip Washington into shape. He's gonna have to take some guys like Ovechkin and Backstrom and make them play more defense, make them forecheck, and they're gonna have to be a better team in that category. Ovechkin's gonna lead the team, obviously with goals. There's no doubt about that. Backstrom's gonna be up there in points again. Orpik and Niskanen are great additions. Maybe a little bit overpriced, but you're adding to Matt Green or Mike Green. They've got Carl Osner, John Carlson on D. So that's a pretty good starting five guys on defense. I think the main guy to watch is going to be Braden Holtby in net. Can he be a number one goalie? He's gonna have to be if they want to make the playoffs and go far enough in the playoffs. He's shown at times he can be a number one, but he's got to show that this season if they're gonna make it. And Evgeny Kuznetsov is gonna have his first full season after coming over from the KHL. He's a great prospect, and we're gonna have to see what line he plays on and if he can have a good full first full season NHL with the Capitals.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch them and see if, like you said, on the defensive end, because Washington's been known for the offense. The next team that we have in sixth is the Columbus Blue Jackets, which, I would put them up there too because they actually did pretty well in the playoffs last year. They gave Pittsburgh some trouble. They haven't really added too much in the off season, but I would say of the teams we talked about so far, they're probably the most balanced team so far, Eddie.
Yeah, they're kind of built like a Western Conference team. They're a big team. They kind of remind me of St. Louis, where the St. Louis doesn't have like main like they're not as good as St. Louis, but there's no like main guy. There's no like Crosby, Ovechkin, Getzlaf, Stamkos. There's no that kind of guy in their team. They're just four good lines that they can put out there. Good goaltending in Sergei Bobrovsky. A lot of people were saying that they could be like the Islanders. Islanders made the playoffs 2 years ago, gave Pittsburgh a run for their money, and then finished 14th last year. But I think Columbus is actually the real deal. Ryan Johansson's gonna have to have another good season for them. Scott Hartnell I think was a really good pickup, trading for him to Philly for giving up R.J. Umberger, and he's gonna bring some veteran presence to their team. And Nathan Horton's going to be healthy. They're going to be a good team this year, and it's going to obviously revolve around Ryan Johansson and Sergei Bobrovsky. But I think seeing them get seventh or sixth in the East around there, maybe even fifth if they can do well enough, isn't a big surprise for Columbus.
Yeah, and then just finishing above Columbus, we've got Montreal. They finished fourth last year. We have them as fifth coming into this season. Obviously, the good news for them, they finally got that Subban deal ironed out, and that's finally done with, so they can move forward. Obviously, the big issue for them was in goal. Last year, that kind of hurt them when they were in that last round going in, and when they got eliminated by the Rangers right before the going into the finals. But I think Montreal, if they stay healthy, I think that they even finishing fifth, they could probably still maybe even finish fourth, and they can rely on Price to take them. I think again to the Eastern Conference Finals. Maybe even towards the finals, Eddie.
Yeah, it's they suffered some big losses. Maybe not the caliber of player, but leadership in the room. Brian Gianta's gone now. Josh Georges is gone. He had a pretty good partnership with PK Subban. The Thomas Vanek, who was only there for part of the season, but they're gonna miss his goals. Danny Briere's gone. It's not a huge loss. Parenteau comes in and fills that spot. But the leadership of Brian Giunta and Josh Georges is going to be missed, and they're going to need some of their young guys. Nathan Beaulieu is going to have to come up, and we'll have to see if he can step up and fill Josh Georges' role. Jared Tenorti is going to get a chance, but one of those two guys is going to have to step up in that defense and do well. Max Pacioretty is going to have a good season. He's going to have to get most of the goals for them. They're a team that can roll out four lines. Parenteau's gonna have to do well. Galchenyuk, Gallagher, Eller. they're all gonna have to contribute to secondary scoring. But when you don't have to worry about this team giving up a lot of goals when you've got Carey Price in the net. So yeah, I think it all comes down to the young guys stepping in on defense for them. But other than that, yeah, like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if they moved up into fourth. I don't see them moving past the teams we have in the top three, but fourth or fifth, and if Carey Price can and carry them far, they might have a deep playoff run again as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the teams that could be in their way, and we have ranked next as fourth in the conference, is the New York Rangers. And they made a lot of additions. They added Dan Boyle, they brought him in, Lombardi, Tanner Glass, among some of the other people that they've added. They did lose Brad Richards, so they've lost a little bit, but the thing that's going to be interesting to see with them is how Rick Nash is going to do, because we talked about that with Danny last week. There's some irritation with the fans there and his lack of performance. Martin St. Louis, you got to see how he does. I mean, he still did pretty decent last year, and Chris Kreider too. So it's a team that they started out slow last year, like we talked about some of these other teams that are kind of on the bubble. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start out slow again and then kind of build steam, halfway through the season, Eddie.
Yeah, and I'm banking on Rick Nash. I think Marty St. Louis might be able to spark Rick Nash to have a good season. They're gonna need Rick Nash to have a good season. They're gonna need Marty St. Louis to have a good season. They lost they lost a couple key guys on defense. Anton Strawman is gone. Justin Falk maybe not so much. Derek Dorsett was a good third fourth line guy for them. Brian Boyle was a great penalty killer for them as well. So they lost some key guys there. They picked up Dan Boyle, who's going to do great on their power play. He's a great defenseman. And then they picked up a lot of kind of bottom six guys: Lee Stepniak, Matthew Lombardi, Tanner Glass. So they didn't really lose a whole bunch. Nothing that they didn't really replace. But it comes down to if Rick Nash can be the guy that they brought him in to be. Marty St. Louis, I think, can spark him to do well this season. He's a setup guy, and if he can play on the same line with Rick Nash, that's why I have them as fourth. And obviously, you've got Lundqvist in that, so there's no problems there. And Derek
Exactly.
Stepan's gonna have to prove that he can be a number one guy. Because right now I think he's a really good number two, but I don't know if he is a number one guy yet. But he's gonna have to step up and prove that he can be that number one guy.
And just finishing above the Rangers, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins, which to me is going to be kind of interesting to see how they do next year because, with losing James Neal, they got to figure out who's going to play with Crosby. And, they lost some key defensive people, Niskanen and Orpik. So, the defense is kind of a concern for me. And we kind of saw that when they had that meltdown against the Rangers in the playoffs. So, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think Pittsburgh's still going to be a top team for sure. But I think they're going to have to rely on some younger guys to step up on the blue line, Eddie.
Yeah, they're gonna have to have a lot of people step up. They lost a lot in almost every position except goaltending. They lost Matt Niskanen, Brooks Orpik, Derek Englund on defense. They lost James Neal and Jussi Jokinen, who were really who did really good for them, especially Jussi Jokinen did really well for them last season. And they added Christian Ehrhoff on defense, which is definitely a really good pickup for them. Patrick Hornquist, Nick Spaulding, Blake Como, Steve Downey. So they kind of added some size, giving up guys like Jussi Jokinen and Tanner. Tanner Glass wasn't a small guy, but Brandon Gibbons, Joe Vitale. They brought in some more grit, some more size, something that they've needed. It's going to be interesting to see. Kunitz is going to be on the left, who's on the right of Crosby. It's been a revolving door for a while now on Crosby's right wing. We'll have to see who plays with him. But it's the Crosby Malkin show in Pittsburgh. They've got a new coach, a new GM. It's relatively the same team. A little bit changes. They'll have to have guys like the Dumoulin and Harrington and Pouliot step up on defense. Oli Mata will have to have a good second season. Marc-Andre Fleury usually has a good season, at least a regular season in the NHL. So um, I see the Penguins. They don't look like they have the best team, but when you compare them with the Montreal and the Rangers, they don't look a ton better. But then obviously two guys stand out in Crosby and Malkin. and that's why I've got them third. I don't see them being better than the two teams we have above them, but they're definitely going to finish strong. They always do, so it won't be a surprise.
Yeah, and speaking of the top two teams, the next one you have on your list is the Boston Bruins. They ended up, number one in the entire league last year, and we've got them number two here in the Eastern Conference. They didn't really do any additions. I think we mentioned before they lost Iginla, so there's going to be some players they got to watch. Riley Smith on the right wing, Erickson on the right wing, to fill in some of those scoring spots for Iginla. But it's a team that's been relatively quiet in the off season, Eddie.
Yeah, and they didn't really have to add much. Like honestly, it won't surprise me if they end up finishing first in the conference, or first or second, as where I have them at second, but finishing first, I don't think would surprise anybody. They won the President's Trophy last year. Jerome McGinley was a big part of their team, though. He had 60 plus points for them. He fit really well on that team, but they just couldn't re-sign him. So somebody's got to fill that offense. Riley Smith will have another good season. Louis Erickson's gonna have a better season than he had last year. And they're just gonna have to play. They're just gonna have to play the same hockey they've always played. The Krejci, Lucic, Bergeron, Marchand, all
Hmm.
those guys, they have a great team, so they're going to do fine. Getting Dennis Seidenberg back from injury is going to be a big boost to them. Tuukka Rask net. So I don't see them. There'd be no surprise to me if they finish first, but I have them second just because I think the loss of Drew McGinley is pretty big, and somebody's got to step up and fill the net where his loss is.
All right, and at number one for the Eastern Conference, we have Tampa Bay. They lost Martin St. Louis last season, but that probably shouldn't be a problem though for them this coming year. The big issue for them was Stamkos going out and being injured last season, and if he stays healthy this year, he should definitely lead the team as he's done before. And Tampa Bay is one of those teams that they made the playoffs last year, and they were improving and improving. And I think in this coming year, they stay healthy. And with some of the newer guys that they've added on the defense, like Strawman and Garrison, I think that they can make a push like we have in our rankings for the top spot in the East, Eddie.
Yeah, Stamkos being back is going to be a huge boost for them. Obviously, losing Marty St. Louis is going to be it's going to be not a huge problem for them, but it's going to hurt. Jonathan Drouin is going to be very interesting to watch. He had another great season in the QMJHL. Steve Eisman decided to keep him down there for the next season. He'll be up here with Tampa. It'll be interesting to see how he does. I think he can get off to at least a 50, 60 point season like McKinnon had. He's a great talent. Stamkos, obviously, we know what he can do. Tyler Johnson and Andre Palat were stand-up rookies for the Lightning last year, and they're gonna have to do that again. Nikita Kucherov is gonna be important to them up on forward. For up for the forwards that they have to watch. Some of the guys that Yzerman added. I think Tampa Bay did one of the best jobs at adding guys in places they needed in the offseason. Anton Strawman and Jason Garrison are two, really good additions for a defense that was struggling last year. Their power play is struggling, and Jason Garrison's a good point man on the power play. Anton Strawman's a good puck possession player, so that's going to really help them out there. Brian Boyle's a great penalty killer for your bottom six center. Brendan Morrow's a good veteran guy to bring in the lineup, and Evgeny Nabokov is an experienced backup who they can put behind Ben Bishop. And speaking of Ben Bishop, he's gonna have to be the guy for them again this season. They've got enough offensive firepower, and I believe in Victor Hedman and Strawman and Gudis and Garrison, they have enough on defense. It's gonna have to be Ben Bishop. It's gonna have to stay healthy, and he's gonna have to have a good season if they want to take the number one spot.
Yeah, so Tampa will definitely be one of the top teams to watch in the East. And now we're going to switch to the Western Conference and go with our standings on that side. And starting off at 14th, we have the Edmonton Oilers, who were also 14th last year. They added some wingers, Pouliot, Purcell, trying to work on the offense there. As everybody knows, Victor Foss was traded also to Edmonton. But it looks like Scrivens is probably going to be the goalie there that they're going to lean on, Eddie, to try and improve from being in the cellar.
Yeah, and Edmonton, um, I kind of fought to put them at the bottom. There's a lot of other teams that could be here, that could easily finish bottom, and Edmonton can finish a little bit higher. But their defense to me is not enough right now. The ideal situation for them would have been drafting Aaron Ekblad. They got the next best thing in a big center, which was something they needed in Leon Draisaitl, but Nugent Hopkins is going to have to do well. Taylor Hall is going to have to have another good season. Eberle, obviously, those three are going to have to lead the way for them. Yakupov is going to have a much better season. And a lot of the young guys are going to have to step up on D. Oscar Klefbom, Darnell Nurse, if he comes up, Martin Marinson. Those are guys who are going to have to fill slots. Mark Fane came in, which is a good pickup. Nikita Nikitin, these are big defensive defensemen. They brought in guys that they needed. I just don't think they're good enough. I don't think their defense is good enough yet. And I think their goaltending is one of the worst. Ben Scrivens, I don't believe he's the number one. And as much as I liked Victor Foss in Anaheim, I don't believe he's the number one either. And if it sounds like Scrivens is their number one guy that going forward, I don't really see him being a long-term number one. I don't see him being able to start 40, 50 games a season and them doing a lot better for a team that led in the most goals last year. Something they need to improve on, and they didn't really do it. So that's why I have them 14th.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, talking about the goalie situation, that's kind of the problem with our next team at 13th, the Calgary Flames. As most people know, Jonas Hiller went to Calgary, and he's going to be playing there. And Calgary had issues in goal too. They were able to score goals last year, but their defense and it was just terrible. I mean, they just cannot hold teams down as far as a goals against. So I think them and Edmonton are going to be kind of battling it out towards the bottom, Eddie.
Yeah, Calgary surprised me last year. They proved at least near the end of the season, and sometimes early on too, that they're a hard team to play against. A lot of their players play with a lot of heart, and they play every game to win. So Jonas Hiller is a good pickup. Last year they definitely had, I think, in my opinion, the worst goalie tandem in the league with Red O'Bara, Joey McDonald, and Kari Ramo in net. Jonas Hiller is a good pickup for them. He's the number one guy. He's proven he can be a number one guy. Mason Raymond's back there. He brings speed. Brandon Bowling is some size. Devin Sotiguchi can score, and he brings speed as well. They lost. The only problem was they lost uh, their number one guy, Mike Camilleri. So somebody's got to fill that role. That's why, and they didn't have the greatest time scoring goals last year. They weren't the worst, but they were one of the worst. So some of these young guys are gonna have to step up, and they lost some guys on defense too, and Shane O'Brien and Chris Butler and Derek Smith. So they're gonna have to have some guys come up and step up. Their defense is still a problem to me. They didn't really add anything other than Derek Englund to address that. They don't really have any top four guys other than Giordano. I think on forward they have a lot going for them. Sven Baertschi is going to have to finally fulfill his potential if he has any shot at making the Flames. Johnny Gaudreau is kind of a sleeper guy to watch this season. I think he's going to have a really good season. He only played one game for Calgary last year at the end of the season, but he scored in that one game. So Sam Bennett, their new draft pick, is going to have a good season. Sean Monahan is going to have another good season. So these are the guys who are going to have to fill the scoring that's lost from Mike Camilleri, and Yuri Hudler is one of those guys too. But I just think their defense is too much of a liability to put them any higher than maybe the bottom two, bottom three teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I agree with you. The defense is going to be key for them. And the next team, too, that we have up, the Winnipeg Jets as well. It's another Canadian team that's, struggled in the West. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do because they're pretty quiet in the offseason. As many people know, they got Matthew Perreault from us, Gallardi, and those are really their only two pickups, and they lost Jokinen. So, I mean, they kind of replaced Perreault for Jokinen there. But they're another team, too, that for them, it's on the offense. I mean, Evander Kane, he's had a couple decent seasons. There was talks about him being moved, and I don't think that's going to happen. But I, they're just inconsistent too, Eddie. I don't see them making the playoffs either.
Yeah, and it really this Evander Kane situation kind of throws their hopes at getting anywhere near a playoff spot, up into the air. I don't really know if Kane's going to be part of the Winnipeg Jets. Maybe by the start of this year or by the middle or by after the trade deadline. It all depends. And he is the main guy in offense. Him, Andrew Ladd, and Brian Little are their main guys, and Wheeler as well. So if he's not there, that's a huge problem for them. And I don't know where his head's at either. So that's why I kind of have them down. It's not farther from where they that much farther from when they were last year. Matthew Pro, I think, is a good pickup. I think they're putting Dustin Byfuglien back on defense, and they've got Zach Bogosian's back there as well. Jacob Trouba, who's a really good D prospect. So their defense isn't too bad. But Pavlik is gonna have to have a lot better season than that. He had goals against average, I think, of like 3.01 last season. So he's gonna have to have a rebound if they want to get them out of the basement in the Western Conference. And they're gonna have to get guys like Mark Scheifele's gonna have to step up, and Vander Kane's gonna have to stay if they have any hope of getting anywhere higher and challenging for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and another team that's having problems too. The as people now know, it's the Arizona Coyotes. They changed their name, and they have problems in the center position. I mean, I know they added Gagne and Vitel, but I mean they lost Verbata, which was huge. Ribeiro, that's another huge loss on offense. So for the Coyotes, I don't know. They're going to be in that same situation as Winnipeg. They're not going to be able to produce a lot of points. I think to win enough games to really get to like an eighth spot.
Yeah, and I don't think adding Sam Gagne and he struggled at center. He wasn't good at faceoffs, and he was more of a winger in Edmonton. I know he's listed as a center, but I don't think he's the answer for them at center. And Mike losing Mike Ribeiro, they bought out Mike Ribeiro, so it's not he obviously wasn't wanted there. They obviously think Sam Gagne is a better option, and losing Radim Verbata is terrible for them. Really, he's been one of their top scorers since he's been there. So guys like Bodker and Vermette and Shane Doan are gonna all have to step up to fill that because Sam Gagne is gonna have to come in as well and hopefully fill the void where that Verbata leaves behind. They still have a strong defense core. They've kind of always had that. I don't think Derek Morris is back, but they've got Brendan Gormley and Keith Yandel, Oliver Ekman Larson. So they're all right there for defense and Mike Smith's in net. So um, uh, for I think they're good. If Mike Smith has a solid season, but they're gonna have to score, and they're gonna have problems without creative guys like Mike Ribeiro and Radim Verbata.
Yeah, and another team that's had issues with scoring that we've got at 10th in the conference is Vancouver Canucks. I mean, a lot happened in the offseason. They picked up goalie Ryan Miller. They got Lucas Pisa from the Ducks, as we all know, and Nick Bodino as well in the Kessler deal. And obviously, they lost Kessler. So they're kind of shaking up their team a little bit. The Sedins really didn't do that well last year. They're going to have to step up. As we mentioned, too, they got Verbata that was on Arizona, so he's going to have to step up as well. But Vancouver's another team, Eddie, that's just I don't know. I mean, I know they're on the bubble. I think if the Sedins can turn it on, maybe they can carry them to eighth. But even then, I just don't see them going far if they are actually able to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and they're one of those teams that didn't want to fully commit to a rebuild. Obviously because that would mean having to do something with the Sedins. So Ryan Miller was brought in, Spiza was brought in the trade with Anaheim, Nick Berdino was brought in, Bobby Sanguinetti is brought in on D, Derek Dorsett and Radim Verbata. Just the problem with the Canucks is Kessler's gone now, and that just puts even more pressure on the Sedins, and they're getting to that age now where you can't these guys aren't like they're still elite players, but this is a lot of pressure for scoring to put on these two guys. And Radim Verbata is a good option to have up there, and Higgins and Burrows and other guys who can score on that team. But you're really looking at the Sedins here to get it done, and I don't really know if they can do that anymore. That's why I've got them at 10th. But and Ryan Miller too. He showed in St. Louis that he struggled behind a team who didn't give up a lot of shots. He comes from Buffalo midway through the season to St. Louis. coming from facing, 30, 40 shots a night, and then he faces maybe 20, 25, and he struggled with that in St. Louis. So uh, he's going to a team that still has a decent defense still, and we'll have to see how he does in Vancouver because he's going to be a big part to any chances that they have as much as the Sedins are.
Yeah, and another team that's on the bubble too, Nashville Predators, we have as ninth in the conference. They in the past have had problems with offense, and they went out and they added James Neal, Olli Jokinen, Mike Ribeiro, Derek Roy. So they've added. It's going to help in the offense, but it's going to be interesting to see how they do. I mean, they could make a push for eighth, maybe seventh. If Pecorini comes back and he's 100% from his injury from last year, Eddie.
Yeah, did any other season I think where there's not eight just solid teams in the West, this Nashville team could make the playoffs, and they still could, but somebody's got to mess up. I think the teams above them are definitely too good, but they've done a lot, and I think they've done some of the best business in the NHL, adding scoring where and centers where they've needed them. Derek Roy, Olli Jokinen, Mike Ribeiro, those are three good centers. They're not top guys, but finding a top center, they were in it for Jason Spezza, but he didn't want to go there. So they got the next best thing. They brought in three good guys. And then James Neal, who, that's a great pickup for them. And their key to success, so like you said, is Pekka Rinne's got to come back from injury and be 100% and be the goalie that everybody knows he can be. They've obviously got a great guys on defense, and Roman Yossi, obviously Shea Weber, Seth Jones. They're pretty much set there. They've only just ever had problems with goal scoring, and it looks like they've addressed that. I just think this top eight in the West with what they've all done, I don't think anybody's got dropped enough for Nashville to break into that top eight. But they have a chance. But they're gonna need guys to produce if they want to make it up there. And Pecorine is gonna have to be stellar.
Yeah, and talking to the top eight, the first team we have making the playoffs at eighth would be the Dallas Stars, which everybody knows they added Jason Spezza, which is going to give them a boost. They lost Chase on. And, we're going to have to watch, of course, Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn. They gave, our Ducks the fits last year in the playoffs, and Lettinen too. He's no slouch in goal. So I could see Dallas not only making eighth, but maybe even seventh, and they could win at least the first round playoff series. They gave us a tough time. I don't doubt that they could go at least to the second round next year, Eddie.
Yeah, and this is what teams have been doing now. This is why I don't think Nashville is enough. Is you gotta have depth at center to go anywhere in the Western Conference, and picking up Spezza was huge for them. Now they've got 1-2 punch in Sagan and Spezza. They've still got Peverley if he's able to come back. They've got Vernon Fiddler and a couple other guys who can play center there. So they're pretty much set down the middle. And Spets is going to come and do well for them. Sagan and Ben are going to be the two main guys on their team, and they're going to have to do exactly the same that they did last year. And Valery Nichushkin is going to be big to any success they had. He started playing well when he was on a line with Ben and Sagan last year, so I could see him. And even if he's on a line with Spezza this year, it's going to be a big year for Valery Nichushkin. And the only problem for the Stars is comes in defense. They didn't really add. Actually, they didn't really add anything for defense, so they're gonna have to promote a couple of young guys. If they've got Daly and Goligoski and Gonchar, but some guys like Jamie Oleksiak and Patrick Nemeth are two monster defensemen they've got down in the AHL who are going to be looking for spots, and Brendan Dillon's going to be key to any success they have as well. So I think if they can show up their defense, they'll definitely be able to challenge for eighth, seventh, or maybe even sixth if they do well enough.
Yeah, and speaking of defense, our next team that we have at seventh, Minnesota Wild, they, had decent defense last year, and they, their issue was kind of a little bit more on the offense. They went out and got Thomas Vanek, so that's going to be huge for them because now you're going to have to watch Vanek, Parise, and Palmaville to get their offense going. And Minnesota, they took out Colorado last year in the playoffs, so they're another team too that even though we have them as seventh, they could end up even sixth, maybe fifth, but they could be in that group there, and they're another team that could win at least the first round series, and they could maybe even win a second round. They gave Chicago a hard time, even though they ended up getting knocked out. But they still played really, really solid defense, Eddie.
Yeah, Ryan Suter's obviously the drill sergeant there back on defense, and they've got a couple other guys there who are no slouches either. And in that, they know there's no like, a lot of people won't even be able to name some of the goalies that they've got there, but Nicholas Backstrom's been a good goalie for them for a while. Josh Harding was great last season before he went down. Darcy Kemper played really well too. So they're if those guys can have good seasons, they're pretty much set there. But adding Thomas Vanek is huge for them. They've got two really good first two lines, and Vanek, Parise, Koivu, Granlund, Pominville. They've got like two really good lines. It remains to be seen if that 1-2 punch down the middle is good enough. If Mika Koivu and Michael Granlund are good enough to bring them any farther than seventh. I don't know. I think Mika Koivu is good enough. I think he's a number two, but Michael Granlund has to have a really solid season if they're gonna make a push anywhere higher than seventh.
Yeah, and like you said too, kind of the trend in the West has been at the center spot too, and the Blues added Stastny in the offseason, which there was rumor that the Ducks are trying to get him, and a few other teams are up there, so they have gone stronger down the center, also adding Lindstrom and Mueller too at center. So St. Louis is a team that we've got at sixth. And it's going to be interesting for them because in net, going with Jake Allen or Brian Elliott, I mean, that's kind of going to be their concern. I think that their defense and their offense is probably good enough, but the goalie situation is something that they're going to have to try and iron out, Eddie.
Yeah, they let in the second least amount of goals in the league or in the West last year, only behind the Kings. So their defense is well, I think they have one of the best all-around teams in the league. They've got Backus, Berglund, and Stastny up the middle. Oshie, Tarasenko. They've got a lot of good players throughout the lineup. They lost Ryan Miller, but they didn't really decide to re-sign him. He didn't really do well with St. Louis. They obviously see something in Jake Allen. I don't think they see Brian Elliott as a long-term starter. He's too old for that. So they must see something in Jake Allen, and he's a good goalie. He's come up and proven that he can play well in the games that he's come up, but it's going to be interesting to see if he can pull off split minutes or split games with Elliott and do well enough for them to finish higher. Uh, he's not going to face a lot of shots, but he's going to have to do well when he faces these shots. And St. Louis isn't going to concede a lot of goals, but their goalies are going to have to be good. I just don't think they're going to be good enough, and that's why I have them at six. But they could challenge for fifth or fourth.
Yeah, speaking of fifth, you've got the San Jose Sharks at fifth, which is kind of interesting situation because they lost Dan Boyle and Havlat, which are two big names that were also floating around where they were going to go, and now those two guys are gone. But their situation, and we talked about this on the podcast last week. They make the playoffs. They have great regular seasons. They've always been usually in the top, if not one or two, at least the top, four or five teams in the Western Conference. But then they just blow out in the playoffs, and now they're coming into training camp, stripping everybody of the captains and alternate captains. So I don't know if that's going to work out for them, if that's the right move. I'm not sure if Thornton's too happy with that because he was another one they were talking about moving. I just think they're going to probably do well again in the regular season, but it's going to be really interesting to see the chemistry between the coaching staff and the players this coming year, Eddie.
Yeah, and they're one of the teams. Like if you go from sixth to first, that there's just going to be a real logjam of teams that are so close together. Any of them could move up, and any of them could move down, really. And San Jose has enough talent. Andy Niemi's in net, and he's a good enough goalie now. Alex Stalock has proven he's a good backup. Their defense is strong enough. Brent Burns, Demers, Irwin, at Mark Edward Vlasic, they have a good defense too, and obviously their forwards that we know, 1-2 punch down the center, and Couture and Thornton, Pavelski can play center as well, or on the wing like he did last year. Marlowe, Thomas Hurdle, who will have a full season this year after being injured. after starting really well last year. I just think we'll just have to see how the locker room works out with this with after this getting going up 3-0 against LA and losing in Game 7. We'll have to see how they rebound after that, and if Thornton actually comes back, like you said, there's been rumors that he wants out. He likes to be in an environment that's kind of calmer. There's rumors he'd go to Nashville where it's not hockey centric. That's what happened when he left Boston and went to San Jose. That's what San Jose was, but now they've kind of the pressure's on in San Jose to win. So we'll have to see if he stays there. But I have them finishing fifth, but they're in that log jam, like I said, where any team in those 5 or 6 teams could finish 3 or 4 spaces higher.
Yeah, and continuing with the logjam, as you mentioned, next up would we have Colorado Avalanche at fourth, which they added Briere, and again let it help out with the scoring. As we talked about earlier, they lost Stashny, and as everybody knows, the last week or so, Jaguar announced his retirement. So this is a team that they did really well last year, ended up getting knocked out by Minnesota, but I see them too being in the logjam. They could end up second in the Western Conference again too, or they could end up fifth or sixth. So it's going to be interesting to see how Colorado goes this next year. I mean, I think Patrick Waugh's got them going in the right direction, Eddie.
Yeah, and everybody's just waiting to see if they're the real deal because I don't think anybody thought they were going to finish as high as they did this year. Their
Right.
defense seemed to have too many problems, but a lot of guys stepped up. Tyson Berry stepped up. So it'll be interesting to see. Briere I think is a really good swap for Parento. This team is all about speed. Nathan McKinnon and Duchesne could possibly be the two fastest players in the league. They're on the same team. Briere is a quick player too. Parento did well there, but he didn't really succeed because he's a slower player, and that's kind of why I don't understand this Jerome McGinley deal. When he went to Pittsburgh, he struggled when they played a quicker style. And then he went to Boston where they're more slow, he can sit by the net and tap the puck in. They're a more slow build-up style, and he did well there. So I don't know how he's going to do in one of the quickest teams in the league. We'll have to see. But losing Paul Stastny is going to hurt, but they still have great center depth without him. They've still got Duchesne, McKinnon, and O'Reilly can play center as well, but he'll probably play in the wing. So yeah, they're not really hurting in offense. Obviously, Paul Stastny is going to hurt, but they hope Jerome McGillney can fill that. I think their defense has to be called into question again. They were pretty good last year. Eric Johnson's gonna have to have another good season. Tyson Berry's got to step up, and a lot of other guys on their blue line are gonna have to step up. And Varlamov's gonna have to be good in net. It just remains to be seen if it wasn't a one season thing or if they can really come back and compete for top four honors again.
Yeah, and also talking about competing in the top teams, we have the Kings as number three in the conference, and they're another team that they just kind of float along in the season. And, last year they were sixth in the conference, and we all know what happened. Obviously, they went on all the way. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the regular season because they really didn't do anything in the offseason. I mean, Gabrick was the big, long-term deal that they did, which I don't really think that was the best thing for them. But, he led them in the playoffs. So I guess, they think that that's what they needed to do. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how the Kings do because it's like the regular season with them doesn't really matter. It's like you have to wait and see for the playoffs and hope you don't play them, Eddie.
Yeah, there's something that always goes wrong in the season for the Kings, and last year they just couldn't score. They had the best goals against in the league. They're the lowest with 174, which is significantly lower than everybody else. So obviously their defense is key to this, and you can see that in their style. Jonathan Quick is one of the best goalies in the league. Drew Doughty's on defense. Jake Muzzin, Alec Martinez, and a lot of other guys contribute defensively on that team. They just have a defensive style, and I think that's what kind of hurt them with goal scoring. But you've got scorers on that team. So I don't see them, going another season where they just don't score any goals. Jeff Carter should be scoring goals. Marion Gabrick now signed should be scoring goals. They don't really have an excuse not to be. Anze Kopitar should be too. But there's just always seems something that goes wrong, and the Kings don't finish near the top of the Western Conference during the season, but they come out in the playoffs and they show why they're one of the best teams in the Western Conference. But they're gonna have to score goals. Gabrick, Toffoli, guys like that are gonna have to step up and score. But I've got them third because it always seems like something goes wrong. So I don't see them finishing near the top. But it like I said, logjam. They sixth anywhere from sixth to first could be possible for them.
Yeah, and then speaking of the logjam, probably the next two teams will probably be the ones that we have up towards the top. Number two, we have the Chicago Blackhawks, who also didn't really do a lot in the offseason. I mean, they added Brad Richards and Rasmussen, and they lost Bolig, but other than that, they didn't really do too much. I mean, we've seen, Chicago's team. I don't really see any holes in that team. I mean, obviously they lost in the 7 games to the Kings, which could have gone either way. But with that lineup that they have, I mean, they're solid on offense. They're solid in the center position. With the long-term deals with Kane and Taves, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with for years to come. And then obviously, Corey Crawford is one of the best in net too, Eddie.
Yeah, and this is a case where top teams really don't need to add much to their teams. Chicago and LA are two of the best teams in the league, and they don't really have any weaknesses where they had to add. Uh, maybe if you had to look at Chicago's team, all they really had to add was a little bit more depth up the center to take some pressure off Jonathan Taves and adding Brad Richards. Adding another leader to the dressing room isn't going to hurt them as well. Their defense is obviously really strong with Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook leading the way back there. Corey Crawford, although I've never been a huge fan of his, he's proven that he can be a solid goalie in the season and in the playoffs. So yeah, and Kane and Taves are gonna be the stars of the show there. Patrick Sharp, I think, is gonna have to have another strong season. Marion Hossa, if they want to challenge for first in the West. And some of they might be promoting some of their younger guys. Brennan Saad might have a bigger role this year. Toivo Teravainen might be able to get into the lineup too. He's a bright prospect for them. And I wouldn't really be surprised if they won the West, but I've got them down for second.
Yep, and number one you have, and who was number one last year, is our very own Anaheim Ducks. Probably not just because it's our team, but probably one of the teams that's made the most moves in the off season. And going with that trend in the West at the center position, the Ducks, as everybody knows, we got Ryan Kessler from Vancouver. We also picked up Nate Thompson from Tampa Bay and Louis LeBlanc from Montreal. So we've added in the center position. Obviously, we lost Bonino and Perot and Koivu in the center positions. So it looks like the Ducks have. It's kind of a case of losing a handful of players, but then we've also replaced them. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think the Ducks really can, not just because we're Ducks fans, but I legitimately think the Ducks can end up first in the conference and not even in the league, getting the President's Trophy. I mean, we were 1 point away last year, Eddie.
Yeah, and it's hard to count out a team who were 4 points clear in the Western Conference and only got significantly better down the middle, and didn't really have to give up a whole bunch, like to get what they've got now. The other teams around them, they kind of lost a lot of guys. St. Louis lost Miller, Colorado lost Stastny, San Jose. San Jose didn't really do anything. Chicago really didn't do anything. LA didn't do anything. And then Anaheim, who had first last year, added a guy like Ryan Kessler to the mix. And I just don't see how you could put them anywhere lower than first. We already stated with all the other teams in this top six, I wouldn't be surprised if Anaheim slipped down, but I've got them first just because of these additions are going to be so helpful. The only question mark with the Ducks is their defense good enough, and are these young guys going to step up? We lost some key guys in Nick Bonino and Matthew Perot, Timu Solani, Saku Koivu. Obviously Jonas Hiller's gone. We brought in some guys to kind of remedy that. Danny Healy's come in. Nate Thompson will probably come in to take Saku Koivu's role. Clayton Stoner's in on defense. Kessler is obviously swapped out or Kessler comes in for where Nick Bonino was. But it just says, is Anderson and Gibson gonna be enough in net for them. I believe it will be. But then you've got, Ricard Raquel, Emerson Needham, Devontae Smith-Pelly, Hampus Lindholm, Sammy Vatanen. Are these guys going to be able to step up and play a big role with the Ducks? We'll have to see.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eddie. I think the regular season is going to help with that, especially once the lines get narrowed down. And I'm not going to go over all that. We've talked about the lines at nauseum in the last couple of podcasts, but my big thing is going to become playoff time because we can win a first round series and we haven't won a second round series, and that's what I'm really concerned about because they came out really nervous and tentative in that game 7 against the Kings, and that's what I need them to fix. In my book, is in the playoffs. They got to carry the play from the regular season to the playoffs and just keep rolling with it. And I think if they do that, they can go all the way, at least to the finals. So for me, if those younger guys get that experience under their wings, then the playoffs shouldn't be a problem this year.
Yeah. When I was going through the playoffs, I'm not gonna do any kind of playoff preview. When I was going through it, I had Anaheim going to the final, and when you play any team from the Eastern Conference, there's only a couple that I think are really a threat. Boston. I don't think Pittsburgh's a huge threat in the playoffs. At least they're obviously a good team, and Tampa Bay as well. Stamkos is healthy, and Ben Bishop is playing well. But if the Ducks can make it past these strong teams in the Western Conference, and make the Stanley Cup final, they have a really good chance of winning the cup for this year coming up.
Definitely. That's going to round out our season preview for the Eastern and Western conferences. Don't forget, we're still giving away 2 tickets to the home opener for the Ducks. And the word this week is home, HOME, home. That's the word this week. Make sure that you listen to the 2 previous podcasts. There's a word that we gave out in each of those. And there'll be words coming up in the next 2 podcasts. And that's it for this week. Thanks for listening.
The Anaheim Ducks are the Stanley Cup champions.